The classroom air was thick with an unspoken tension, the kind that made every whispered breath feel too loud. Every shuffle of shoes echo like a confession. The boy sat still, his small hands clenched against the wooden desk, his eyes fixed on the teacher who towered above him with a smirk that cut deeper than any blade. She had just repeated his words back to the class with exaggerated mockery, her voice pitched high, almost sing-song. "My dad works at the Pentagon," she said, and the class erupted in cruel laughter, the kind of laughter that twists in your stomach and makes you wish the ground would swallow you whole. The boy's cheeks burned hot, but he refused to look away, refused to let her win. Though inside his heart beat with a fury that tasted like salt and iron, he could not cry, not now, not here. The teacher's smile was thin and sharp, her eyes gleaming with the power she thought she held. She had always been like this, the kind of teacher who picked her favorites and punished those who dared to shine without her permission. And today it was his turn to be her spectacle. She leaned closer, her perfume suffocating, her whisper just loud enough for the front row to hear. "You should not lie about things like that. It makes you look foolish." And her words dripped with condescension, like venom sliding into a vein. The boy clenched his jaw, the sound of the other students' laughter still ringing in his ears, a symphony of betrayal, because none of them would defend him. Not one then. Just as the boy felt the heat of shame tighten around his throat, the classroom door creaked, not loudly, but enough to slice through the chorus of giggles. The sound made everyone pause, heads turning in slow motion, like prey sensing a predator's approach. And in that single breath of silence, the boy felt a shift, something different, something powerful, as if the air itself knew that the moment was about to crack wide open. And when the door swung further, the figure stepping inside was not another student or a wandering janitor, but a man in a crisp military uniform, tall and broad-shouldered, his presence commanding instant respect, his gaze sharp as steel. The room fell silent, and even the teacher's smirk faltered. The laughter died mid-breath, and the boy's heart leaped into his throat, because there he was, his father, the man no one believed existed in the way he said, standing right there in front of them. All the man did not speak right away. He simply looked, eyes sweeping the room, landing finally on the boy, and in that silent connection was 1,000 unspoken words, years of sacrifice, pride, and love. The boy straightened in his chair, the shame that had wrapped around him like a noose loosened, replaced by a flicker of something else, something like hope, something like fire. The teacher's voice cracked when she tried to recover. "Can I help you, sir?" her tone struggling to balance between arrogance and fear. The uniform gleamed under the fluorescent lights, the insignia on his chest enough to silence any doubt. And when he finally spoke, his voice carried the weight of authority that no one in that room could challenge. "You can start," he said slowly, his eyes never leaving hers. "By explaining why you mocked my son." The students froze, their mouths slightly open, their eyes darting between the teacher and the man at the door. The silence was heavy, suffocating, the kind that made every heartbeat sound like thunder in the chest. And the boy sat there, a storm of emotion swirling inside him, pride and anger and fear colliding. Because this was not just about being mocked, this was about being believed, about finally being seen. The silence after his words was like a heavy curtain dropped across the room. No one dared to breathe too loudly. The teacher swallowed hard, her eyes flickering with the kind of fear that comes when power slips suddenly from your hands. She stammered, her voice thin. "I was just trying to teach him not to lie." And the moment those words left her mouth, the boy felt his chest tighten, because she was still calling him a liar, still refusing to see the truth standing right in front of her. The man in uniform stepped forward, each stride measured and deliberate, his boots hitting the floor with a sound that echoed like a drumbeat, his presence filling the small classroom until it seemed too small to contain him. He stopped just inches away from the teacher, his voice steady and calm, yet carrying an edge that could cut through steel. "You think my son lies," he said, and the teacher's lips parted but no sound came. Her confidence drained from her like water from a cracked glass. The students sat frozen, eyes wide, some with guilt flickering across their faces for having laughed, others with awe for the man who stood so tall and sure. The boy felt a tremor of relief, but also a sharp pang of anger that it had taken his father's arrival to silence their cruelty. He wanted to scream at them all, wanted to shout that he had been telling the truth all along, but instead he kept his eyes fixed on his father, the one anchor he could trust in this storm of betrayal. The man's hand rested briefly on his son's shoulder, a gesture so small yet so full of meaning, as if to say, "You are not alone." "Not anymore." The teacher tried to muster authority again, her tone sharp though her voice trembled. "This is highly inappropriate. You cannot just barge into my classroom." But the boy's father did not flinch, did not waver. He simply tilted his head, his eyes narrowing. "Inappropriate," he repeated slowly, the weight of the word pressing down on her. "What is inappropriate is humiliating a child, mocking him in front of his peers, crushing his voice because you assume you know the truth." The silence stretched, and every student could feel the sting of those words, like they themselves had been struck, because deep down they knew they had been part of the cruelty too. Laughing when they should have stood up, joining in when they should have stayed silent, the boy's chest swelled with conflicting emotions, pride and pain twisting together. He had dreamed of this moment countless times, of someone walking in and forcing the world to see him, to see his truth. But now that it was here, it was heavier than he imagined, because behind the relief was a wound that had already formed, a wound carved by laughter and disbelief. The man's gaze swept across the class, landing briefly on each student, and though he said nothing, the weight of his stare was enough to make them shift uncomfortably in their seats, as if he could see the guilt buried inside each of them. Then his eyes returned to the teacher, his tone sharper now. "Do you know what it means when a man serves at the Pentagon?" he asked, his words not just a question but a blade, and she shook her head slightly, her arrogance crumbling under his unwavering presence. "It means he serves his country at the highest levels. It means he carries the burden of secrets and strategies that protect families like yours. It means he sacrifices nights with his child to protect a nation, and you dare to mock his son for speaking the truth." Her face paled, her lips quivering, but she said nothing, because there was nothing she could say. The boy watched her shrink before him, the same teacher who had always stood so tall, who had always wielded her authority like a weapon, now reduced to silence under the gaze of a man who needed no raised voice to command the room. And the boy felt something shift inside him, something break and rebuild all at once. He realized in that moment that truth did not always protect you, that sometimes the world needed proof before it would believe, and that proof had walked through the door in uniform. But he also knew that scars remained, scars that even his father's presence could not erase. The students exchanged glances, some biting their lips, others looking down at their desks, ashamed, the air heavy with unspoken guilt. The boy's father finally spoke again, his tone softer now, but still firm. Class dismissed, and though the teacher opened her mouth to protest, no one moved to support her. One by one the students gathered their books and slipped out, the scrape of chairs against the floor the only sound, until the room was nearly empty. Only the boy, his father, and the teacher remained, the tension so thick it seemed to press against the walls. The boy's father turned to him, his eyes softening, in a way they never did in public, the kind of softness reserved only for moments like this, moments when the weight of the world lifted just enough to let love show through. "Are you all right?" he asked quietly, and though the boy wanted to say yes, wanted to show strength, the words stuck in his throat. His eyes burned and he nodded instead, because admitting the pain felt too heavy, too raw. The father's hand squeezed his shoulder again, steady and reassuring, before he turned back to the teacher, who stood clutching her desk, as if it were the only thing keeping her upright. "You owe him an apology," the father said, his tone unyielding, and for a long moment she did not speak, her pride battling her fear, her eyes darting between the boy and his father, until finally, in a voice so small it almost vanished in the air, she whispered, "I am sorry." But the words rang hollow, forced, and the boy felt no comfort in them. His father's eyes narrowed, but he did not push further. Instead he simply said, "Remember this moment, because the measure of a teacher is not in how she teaches facts, but in how she shapes the spirit of her students." The words lingered like smoke, heavy and unshakable. The boy and his father left the classroom, the hallway stretching ahead like a long road out of darkness, the murmurs of students echoing faintly from around corners, whispers of the spectacle they had just witnessed, whispers that would grow into rumors, into stories, into truths twisted and reshaped by mouths eager to tell them. But for the boy, the moment was not about the crowd. It was about survival, about finally being seen, and as he walked beside his father, his small frame dwarfed by the man in uniform, He felt both protected and exposed, safe yet marked, because now everyone knew, and knowledge had a way of changing everything. The father's hand rested briefly on his back as they walked, a silent promise that he was not alone. But beneath the warmth of that touch, the boy carried a cold realization. This was only the beginning. The mocking laughter might be silence for now, but the sting of betrayal from his peers and the hollow apology from his teacher had left cracks in him, cracks that could grow if not carefully mended. And though his father had defended him today, the boy knew that the battles ahead would not always end with the uniform stepping through the door. Some battles would be his alone to fight, in hallways, in whispered jokes, in the silence of nights when doubt crept in on. So as they reached the end of the corridor, the father pushing open the door to the outside world, where sunlight poured like a promise of freedom, the boy inhaled deeply, the air sharp and cool, and for the first time that day he allowed himself to breathe without shame. But he also knew that tomorrow would come, and with it the whispers, the stares, the tests of his resilience. Yet deep inside him something stronger than shame had begun to stir, a spark that would grow into fire. And he promised himself in that moment that he would never again bow his head when he spoke his truth, because truth deserved to be carried. Even when the world tried to silence it. The next morning the boy walked into school with his backpack slung low across his shoulders and his stomach knotted so tightly it felt like it might tear. The memory of yesterday burned in him, both like a shield and like a wound. He had walked out of that classroom with his father at his side, stronger than ever. But strength has a way of fading under the weight of whispers, and he could feel them already, the glances that lingered too long, the hushed voices that fell silent the moment he drew near, as if the hallways themselves carried his shame in echoes. His heart pounded, but he forced his chin higher, telling himself he would not shrink. Not again, not after everything his father had said. But the truth was harder than he expected, because when he entered the classroom the laughter was gone. Yes, yet something else had replaced it. Something colder, a kind of quiet cruelty that did not shout or mock, but lived in smirks, in the turning of heads, in the way desks shifted just slightly away from his. The teacher stood at the front pretending nothing had happened, her hair tied tighter than usual, her voice overly bright as she greeted the class. Yet the boy could see it, the stiffness in her posture, the way her eyes slid away from him. She had not forgotten, she had not forgiven, and though she had apologized with her lips, her pride had never bent. She carried resentment now, like a dagger hidden beneath her sleeve. As the lesson dragged on, the boy could hear the faintest whispers drifting from behind him, small breaths of words just low enough to sting without being caught. Liar, spoiled, daddy's boy, Pentagon prince. The words struck harder than laughter because they were meant to wound quietly, to slip beneath the skin and fester where no one else could see. His fists clenched beneath the desk, his nails digging crescents into his palms. But he refused to turn, refused to let them see the pain in his eyes, because if he gave them that, then they would win. Again when the bell finally rang, he hurried out, desperate for air, but the hallway was no kinder. Two boys leaned against the lockers, their voices just loud enough for him to hear. Bet his dad threatened the teacher. That's the only reason she shut up. Another chimed in. Yeah, my mum said people like him get special treatment. Their words twisted like barbed wire. And though the boy kept walking, his steps quickened, his throat tight. The truth no longer mattered to them. They had already written their own version of the story, and he was the villain. In Eat at Lunch, he sat alone, the tray untouched in front of him, the cafeteria buzzing with conversations that did not include him. His old friends, seated at a distance, glancing at him then quickly looking away, betrayal biting sharper than hunger. He thought of approaching them, thought of asking why. But the fear of rejection weighed too heavy, so he sat still, his hands folded tight, trying not to let the tears escape, because crying here would be another wound, another scar to carry when he returned home. That evening his father noticed the heaviness in his walk, the way his shoulders drooped like branches under too much snow. How was school? He asked, his voice steady but laced with concern, and the boy hesitated, swallowing the lump in his throat. Fine, he whispered, but his father knew better. He always knew. He crouched down, his eyes level with his son's. They are punishing you because the truth shamed them, he said gently. People will always fear what they cannot control, but you must never let their fear become your chain. The words were strong, but the boy wondered if words alone could carry him through another day of silence, of whispers, of eyes that refused to meet his. Later that night, Lying in bed, with the shadows creeping along his walls, the boy replayed the day again and again, each whisper louder, each glance sharper, until his chest felt hollow. He remembered the look in his teacher's eyes, the hidden rage beneath her false smile, and a thought flickered through him. What if she found a way to strike back, not with open mockery this time, but in silence, in grades, in opportunities withheld? The thought chilled him, because she had the power, and power in the hands of someone who hated you was more dangerous than laughter ever could. 80 days that followed only deepened the wound. His classmates did not shout or laugh anymore, but the exclusion cut deeper. Games at recess were played without him, group projects filled without his name. When he raised his hand, the teacher seemed to look through him, calling on others instead, and each time it felt like another stone added to the weight he carried. Soon he stopped raising his hand at all, stopped trying to push his way in, retreating instead into silence, because silence felt safer than rejection. Yet in that silence grew anger, sharp and burning, an anger he did not know how to release. One afternoon, as he walked home alone, he heard footsteps behind him. Turning quickly, he saw 3 boys from his class, their faces hard, their smiles cruel. They closed in, their voices sneering. "Where's your Pentagon daddy now?" One shoved his shoulder, another snatched at his backpack. He tried to push past, but they blocked his path. Laughter, rising like smoke, he clenched his fists, the memory of his father's words echoing, "Truth must never be chained." But truth felt so small against fists and taunts. Still he did not run. He stood his ground, his voice shaking but clear. "Leave me alone," he said, and for a moment, they paused, surprised by his defiance. Then one of them spat at his shoes, muttering pathetic. Before they turned and walked off, their laughter trailing behind them like poison in the air, he stood frozen, his heart racing, his hands trembling, rage bubbling inside him, not just at them but at everyone, at his classmates, at his teacher, at the world that refused to see him. He wanted revenge, wanted justice, wanted something that would make them feel the humiliation he carried every day. Yet at the same time he wanted peace, wanted healing, wanted to believe his father's words, that truth was enough. But truth without belief was fragile, and he was tired of carrying fragility on his shoulders. That night he sat by the window, staring at the dark sky, wondering if stars felt the same, bright but distant, shining but ignored. His father entered quietly, placing a hand on his shoulder. "I know it is not easy," he said, "but storms carve mountains. Pain makes you unbreakable if you let it." The boy nodded, but inside he questioned whether strength was worth so much suffering. He wondered if the storm would ever pass, or if he was doomed to live always under its shadow. And in that silent night, with whispers echoing in his mind and anger coiling in his chest, he made himself a promise that one day he would rise above all of them, that one day their whispers would choke in their throats, that one day they would see not just his truth but his strength. And when that day came, he would not need their approval, because the fire inside him would burn brighter than any doubt they tried to cast upon him. The days stretched into weeks, and the weight of whispers never faded. Instead, it grew sharper, heavier, like a shadow that clung to him wherever he walked. The boy kept his head low, his fists clenched inside his pockets, his eyes burning with silent fury, yet still he endured, telling himself that if he could just hold on, his father's words would prove true. Storms carve mountains, pain makes you unbreakable, but storms also drown, and he was beginning to feel the water rising around his chest. The betrayal came quietly, not in shouts or fists, but in the voice of someone he thought was his friend, someone he had once shared secrets with under the oak tree behind the playground. His name was Marcus, a boy who had laughed with him, who had sat beside him at lunch when no one else did. But one afternoon the boy overheard Marcus speaking in low tones to 2 of the same boys who had mocked him before. "He thinks he's better than us just because his dad works at the Pentagon," Marcus muttered, his voice bitter, "but without that uniform he's nothing." The words struck harder than any shove, because betrayal from a stranger is a wound, but betrayal from a friend is poison that seeps deeper than flesh. The boy stood frozen around the corner, his stomach twisting, the voices muffled by the roar of blood in his ears. When Marcus returned to him later, smiling as if nothing had happened, the boy felt something inside him crack. He did not speak, did not confront. He simply stared, the silence louder than any accusation. Marcus shifted uneasily, sensing the shift, but said nothing, and the distance between them grew like a canyon. wide and cold. Another piece of trust torn away. Another reason for the boy to retreat into himself. The teacher too had not forgotten. Though she no longer mocked him openly, she found other ways, subtle ways that only he could feel. His essays, marked with harsh comments that seemed less about the work and more about him. His grades lowered without explanation. Opportunities for class leadership quietly given to others. She wore her full smile for the world, but when her eyes landed on him they carried a shadow, a quiet vengeance, and though he tried to ignore it, tried to rise above, the injustice gnawed at him like rats in the dark, chewing piece by piece at his confidence. At home he pretended. He wore the mask of strength so his father would not worry. But in the silence of his room the mask slipped. He stared at his reflection in the mirror, eyes rimmed red, lips trembling, and he whispered to himself, "They will not break me." Yet his voice shook, the cracks in his resolve widening with every whisper he carried from school, with every stare that told him he did not belong. The boy who had once spoken proudly of his father's work now avoided the topic altogether, afraid that speaking truth would only invite more cruelty. One evening, as he sat at the kitchen table, his homework untouched, his father entered, sensing the storm in his son's silence. "What weighs on you?" he asked, his tone steady yet soft, and the boy almost confessed, almost poured out the betrayal, the whispers, the loneliness. But instead he clenched his jaw and said, "Nothing," because part of him feared his father would see it as weakness, feared that admitting the pain would mean he had already lost. His father studied him with eyes that saw more than the boy wanted to reveal, but he did not press. Instead he simply said, "Strength is not silence, my son. Strength is choosing when to speak and when to fight." Then left him to the silence that wrapped tighter than chains. The breaking point came on a cold morning, when the boy was called to the front of the class to present his project. He had worked hard, pouring his heart into it, crafting every detail with care, hoping that perhaps this time effort would shine brighter than rumor. But as he stood before the class, his voice steady at first, a hand shot up from the back. It was Marcus, his once friend, his voice cutting like glass. "Did your dad do this for you too?" The class chuckled, low but sharp, and the teacher did nothing, her silence permission for the cruelty to grow. The boy's throat tightened, his paper shaking in his hands, his heart pounding with rage and shame, and for a moment he wanted to scream, wanted to tear the project in half and walk away. But instead he forced his voice to continue, though each word was cracked, his eyes stinging with unshed tears. When he sat down, the laughter still lingered in the air, his project forgotten, his effort crushed beneath the weight of their scorn. The teacher moved on as if nothing had happened, as if his humiliation was invisible, and in that moment he realized she would never protect him, that she reveled in his suffering quietly, and the betrayal of that truth ignited something deep within him. Not just anger but resolve, a burning determination that one day he would rise so high they could never reach him again, that one day they would choke on their own disbelief. That night he sat with his journal, the only place he let his voice run free. He poured the words out, every wound, every betrayal, every whisper, the pages filling with raw pain and defiance. "They think I am weak," he wrote. "They think I need my father to fight for me, but they do not see the fire in me. They will see one day. They will see, and they will regret every word they ever spoke." His hand trembled as he wrote, but the fire inside him steadied, growing brighter with every stroke of the pen. In quiet that followed he heard his father's footsteps outside his door, the familiar pause before he moved on, and the boy closed his journal quickly, hiding his thoughts. For some battles had to be fought alone, and though he craved his father's comfort, he also craved the strength of knowing he could stand on his own, even if it meant standing in pain. The days that followed carried new weight. The boy no longer sought the approval of his classmates, no longer waited for kindness from his teacher. Instead he built walls inside himself, tall and strong, walls that protected his heart from their words, yet also isolated him, leaving him adrift in silence. But within those walls he nurtured his resolve, whispering to himself in the dark, "I will not be broken, I will not be small, I will not let them win." And those whispers became his anchor, his secret weapon, his survival. And yet survival was not enough, because each betrayal carved deeper, each whisper cut sharper, and he began to dream not only of surviving but of revenge, of a day when the balance would tip, when those who had mocked and doubted would taste the bitterness they had fed him. The thought both frightened and fueled him. a dangerous seed planted in the soil of his pain, growing quietly, waiting for the moment it would burst through. Winter air had grown sharper, biting at his cheeks as he walked to school, each breath leaving a cloud behind him like smoke rising from a fire that refused to die. Inside him the fire burned hotter with every passing day, fueled by betrayal, by whispers, by the silent cruelty that no one else seemed to see. He had learned to wear his silence like armor, to let the whispers wash over him without flinching. But beneath that calm exterior the rage swelled, and the seed of revenge planted in his chest had begun to sprout, twisting roots around his thoughts, whispering promises of power if only he let it grow. One afternoon, after another class where his teacher ignored his raised hand, where his classmates laughed at a muttered joke about his father, the boy snapped, not outwardly, but inside. He could feel it, the moment when anger solidified into something colder, something sharper. He sat at his desk staring at the chalkboard, the words blurring before his eyes, and he thought to himself, if they want me to be silent, then I will be silent. But one day, they will all regret the silence they forced upon me. One day my voice will be too loud for them to drown out. That evening at home, his father spoke about duty, about sacrifice, about the weight of serving a country that did not always give back what it demanded. His words carried pride, but also weariness, a shadow in his eyes that the boy had not noticed before. People will never understand the cost of truth, his father said, but that does not mean you stop carrying it. The boy nodded, but inside he wondered, was truth enough? Had truth ever been enough? Because truth had not shielded him from betrayal, had not stopped the laughter or the whispers. It was only his father's presence, his uniform, his power, that had silenced them, and the boy wondered what would happen when that power was not there to protect him. The next day the betrayal grew deeper, for Marcus, his old friend turned stranger, had spread a rumor, one that slithered through the hallways like smoke. It claimed that his father had only shown up because the boy had begged, that the uniform had been a show, that the man was not as important as he claimed, and though the rumor was a lie, it spread faster than truth ever could, filling the ears of every student until they looked at the boy with new smirks, new doubts, the whispers cutting sharper than before, liar, fraud, weak. The boy clenched his fists until his knuckles whitened, but he said nothing, for silence had become his weapon as much as theirs. But silence was not enough, not anymore, and when he saw Marcus laughing with the others, when he saw the teacher's satisfied smirk as she watched the rumor spread without lifting a finger, something inside him broke. He stormed out of the classroom, his footsteps echoing down the hall, each stride heavier than the last. He did not know where he was going, only that he had to move, had to escape before the fury inside him consumed everything around him. He ended up at the oak tree behind the school, the place where he and Marcus had once sat together, sharing secrets and dreams. The memories stabbed at him like knives, the laughter they had shared now poisoned by betrayal. He pressed his forehead against the rough bark, the cold air burning his lungs, and he whispered to himself, "They will pay, all of them. One day they will pay." The words scared him even as they fueled him, because he could feel the fire growing stronger, hungrier, threatening to consume the boy he once was. That night he dreamed of confrontation, of standing in the classroom and shouting his truth until their faces twisted in shame, of watching the teacher crumble, of Marcus begging for forgiveness. The dreams filled him with a dark satisfaction that lingered even when he woke, and for the first time he wondered if revenge might be the only path left, if healing was just a lie the world told to keep the broken from rising. His heart raced with the thought, and he clenched his fists under the blanket, whispering to himself again, "They will see, they will all see." The chance came sooner than he expected, for the school had scheduled a special assembly where parents were invited. The auditorium buzzing with chatter, rows of students sitting stiffly while teachers hovered at the edges. The boy sat quietly, his father at his side, his presence once again drawing glances, whispers, suspicion, and the boy felt the fire rise in his chest. He wanted to stand, to shout, to throw their disbelief back in their faces, and for a moment he almost did, almost let the fire spill out in flames. But his father's hand on his shoulders steadied him, grounding him, reminding him of the weight of restraint. But when the assembly ended and the parents filed out, Marcus smirked at him from across the room, leaning close enough to whisper, "Without your daddy, you're nothing." The words slithered into his ears like poison, and before he could stop himself, the boy lunged, his fists swinging, the world erupting into gasps and shouts, his knuckles connecting with Marcus's jaw, the satisfaction sharp and fierce, but short-lived, for within seconds teachers pulled them apart. The boy's chest heaving, his eyes blazing, Marcus clutching his face and sneering. "See, violent, just like his dad." The words rang louder than the punch, echoing through the room, twisting truth into another weapon dragged into the principal's office. The boy sat in silence, his father beside him, the teacher smirking faintly in the corner, and the principal's voice droned about discipline, about rules, about how violence solved nothing. The boy stared at the floor, his fists clenched, rage boiling that they would punish him for defending himself, while Marcus walked free of guilt. His father spoke calmly, defending him, reminding the principal of the taunts and bullying, but the words seemed to fade in the air, unheard, unwanted, and the boy realized then that the system itself was stilted, that authority did not always mean justice, that sometimes even uniforms could not bend the scales that night. Back in his room, the boy sat with his journal again, the pages now darker, heavier, filled not only with pain but with plans, dreams of revenge etched in messy lines. He imagined standing above them all, stronger, untouchable, and he whispered to himself in the dark, "I will rise, and when I do they will regret every word, every whisper, every betrayal." The fire inside him burned so bright it felt like it might consume him, yet he clung to it, because it was the only thing that made him feel alive, the only thing that gave meaning to his suffering. But beneath the fire, deep in the quiet corners of his heart, another voice lingered, softer, steadier, the echo of his father's words. Storms carve mountains, truth must never be chained, and the boy felt the pull of both voices, one dragging him toward revenge, the other toward resilience. And he did not know yet which one would win, only that the choice would come soon. And when it did, it would shape not only his fate, but the man he would one day become. The boy could not sleep that night. The fight at the assembly replayed in his mind like a broken film reel. Every punch, every whisper, every accusing stare burned into him. His chest rose and fell with uneven breaths, the fire inside him raging so hot he thought it might scorch his skin from the inside out. He sat by the window watching the darkness swallow the streetlights, his fists clenched against the sill, and he whispered to himself, over and over, "They will see, they will all see." Yet beneath the rage there was something else, a weight pressing on his chest, a question that gnawed at him. If he chose revenge, if he gave in fully, what would he become? Would he still be his father's son, or would he become the very shadow they wanted him to be? Morning came heavy, the air in the house thick with unspoken tension. His father sat across from him at the kitchen table, eyes steady, hands folded, the silence stretching long until finally he spoke, his voice quiet yet unyielding. "You are at a crossroads," he said. "I see the fire in your eyes. I hear the anger in your voice. I know you want to fight back, but hear me, son. Revenge is a path with no end. It does not free you, it chains you tighter." The boy swallowed hard, the words digging into him like nails, but his jaw tightened and he muttered, "They will never stop, they will never believe, no matter what I do." His father leaned closer, his gaze sharp as steel, yet soft as the hand he laid over his son's. "Then you rise above them, not to prove to them who you are, but to prove to yourself. Storms carve mountains. Pain makes you unbreakable. You cannot let them decide the man you will become." The boy wanted to scream, to reject the words, but something in his father's eyes rooted him, something steady, something unbroken, and for the first time he wondered if revenge would really bring the peace he craved, or if it would only feed the fire until nothing of him remained. The thought lingered as he walked to school that morning, the whispers still chasing him through the hallways, the stare still cutting into his skin, Marcus smirking in the distance, the teacher's eyes cold with quiet vengeance. Yet somewhere, inside him, the echo of his father's words clung to him, a thread of light in the storm. The final test came in the classroom that afternoon, for the teacher announced a debate assignment. Partners chosen at random, fate as cruel as it could be, paired him with Marcus, the betrayal still raw, the anger still sharp. When their names were called, the class chuckled, the sound like knives scraping bone. Marcus grinned, leaning close enough to whisper, "This is my chance to ruin you." And the boy felt the fire flare, his fists itching, his vision clouding. But then his father's words surged through him. Truth must never be chained. Storms carve mountains. Strength is not silence, but choosing when to speak and when to fight. He exhaled slowly, forcing the fire into focus. When the day of the debate arrived, the room buzzed with anticipation, the students eager to watch the spectacle. To see him fall, the teacher's smirk thin and sharp as she announced the topic. He stood beside Marcus, his hands trembling at first. But as the debate began, Marcus sneered and spat lies, twisting words, mocking subtly with every sentence. Yet the boy did not falter. He listened, he breathed. And when his turn came, he spoke with a voice steadier than he thought possible. He spoke not only of the topic, but of truth itself, weaving his words with the strength of his pain, with the lessons carved into him by storms. With the fire he had carried for so long now reshaped into light, the room fell silent as he spoke. The same silence that had once crushed him now stretched like a canvas, every word painting strength across it. His classmates leaned in, caught off guard by the power in his voice. Marcus fidgeted beside him, his smirk faltering. The teacher's face tightening as if each word cut through the armor she had built. The boy's heart pounded, but he did not stop. He poured everything into those moments, every wound, every betrayal, every ounce of strength his father had given him, until his voice trembled not from fear but from the weight of truth, laid bare. When he finished, the silence hung heavy, thicker than any laughter, deeper than any whisper, and slowly, almost reluctantly, the room broke into quiet applause, not loud, not thunderous, but real. And in those claps was something he had not felt in so long. Acknowledgement, maybe not from all, maybe not from the teacher whose eyes still burned with resentment, maybe not from Marcus who muttered curses under his breath, but from enough to prove that his voice mattered, that truth had finally carved through the noise. After class, Marcus shoved past him, muttering, "This isn't over." But the boy only watched him go. The anger is still there, yes, but no longer consuming him. He realized then that revenge would have left him empty, but standing tall, speaking truth, had filled him with something else, something stronger than rage. His father waited for him at home that evening, and when he told him what had happened, when he described how his words had silenced the room, his father smiled, pride flickering through the weariness in his eyes. "You found your voice," he said, and the boy nodded, because he knew it was truth. The whispers did not vanish overnight. The cruelty did not disappear. The teacher's resentment did not fade. Marcus did not become a friend again, but something inside the boy had changed, and that change was enough, because their words no longer cut as deep. Their stares no longer chained him. He had learned that storms do not end when you wish them to, but they do carve mountains, and he had become one, unshakable, unbroken. His fire no longer a weapon of revenge, but a light to guide him forward. Years later, when he looked back, when the wounds had faded into scars, he understood what his father had meant, that sometimes losing everything you thought you needed, acceptance, friendship, approval, was the only way to find who you really are. And who he was had been forged in fire, in betrayal, in storms that had threatened to break him but had instead made him unbreakable. He carried that truth with him always, not as a burden but as a crown. For he had learned the lesson that changed everything. Sometimes the world will mock you, sometimes it will betray you, sometimes it will try to chain your truth. But if you endure, if you rise, then the fire inside you will outshine every shadow. And so the boy who had once sat humiliated at his desk, mocked for speaking truth, walked into his future not as a victim of whispers but as a man who had transformed his pain into power, his silence into voice, his scars into strength. The storm had not broken him, it had carved him into a mountain, and from that mountain his voice would never be silenced again. The end.